she was standing alone in the middle of a room that was never meant to welcome her. No shouting, no slamming doors, just the low, measured voice of a Korean matriarch in a gray tailored suit, speaking to a black woman like she was a problem that needed to be quietly resolved. Jade had just gotten married. 6 weeks. The ring was still new on her finger. She had learned Korean words of respect. She had walked into that mansion with her chin up and her heart open. And what she received in return was this. This family has a name, a position. You belong to neither. She stood there, honey golden skin, silk dress, wedding ring catching the light, completely alone. Because the man who had promised to stand beside her was not in that room. He was hidden, listening from the dark of a closet upstairs, while his mother and his sister took apart his black bride, piece by piece, word by word, in voices so calm they were almost kind. He was a Korean mafia boss, tattoos on his neck, men who feared him across 3 states, and he was hiding. But here is what no one in that room was prepared for. Jade did not break. She did not lower her voice. She did not shrink. She looked the most dangerous woman in that family directly in the eyes, and she stayed. And what he heard from that closet did not just change his mind, it changed everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There are mansions built for living, and there are mansions built for control. The difference is not in the architecture, it is in the silence. The home of the Park family sat at the end of a private road in Alpine, New Jersey, behind iron gates and security cameras that no neighbor ever commented on, because in Alpine, the neighbors had learned long ago that commenting on certain things was not wise. The house was white stone and dark glass, surrounded by gardens that were always perfectly trimmed, because disorder of any kind was not permitted. Not in the hedges, not in the accounts, and certainly not in the bloodline. Park Jin-hyuk had grown up in that silence. He had learned to read it before he learned to read words. He knew the specific quality of his mother's quiet when she was calculating. He knew the particular stillness of a room when a decision had already been made and was simply waiting to be announced. He had built his own empire on the same principle, that silence, wielded correctly, was more powerful than any weapon. What he had not anticipated was that love would make him temporarily forget all of that. Jade Elaine Carter had come into his life the way most irreversible things do, quietly, without warning, carrying none of the markers he had been trained to assess for threat. She was an architect. She designed spaces for people to live in. She had opinions about light and proportion and the way a room should make a person feel when they entered it. She laughed at things he said that he had not intended to be funny. She asked him questions no one in his world ever asked, not because they didn't want to know the answers, but because they understood that certain questions were not asked. Jade asked them anyway. He had married her on a Tuesday in Manhattan, in a ceremony that was small by necessity and large in every way that mattered. She wore off-white silk. Her honey golden skin caught the afternoon light through the window of the magistrate's office, and he had stood across from her thinking, with a clarity that frightened him slightly, that he had never made a decision in his life that felt this certain. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now they stood in the corridor of his mother's house, and he could feel, in the specific texture of the air, that the silence had changed its quality. He had been in enough rooms before disasters to recognize the atmospheric pressure of what was coming. He had said nothing to Jade. She was still glowing, still carrying the residual warmth of Jeju Island in her posture, still believing, as people in love are entitled to believe for at least a little while, that what was true between two people could hold against whatever surrounded them. He had kissed her forehead and watched her descend the staircase. And then he had not followed. He told himself, in the moment, that he needed to know, that it was strategic, that a man in his position could not afford to be surprised, that information gathered without the subject's knowledge was simply intelligence, and intelligence had kept him alive for 36 years in a world where carelessness was fatal. These were all true things. They were also, and he would understand this only later, the precise rationalizations of a man who was afraid. Not of his mother, not of his sister, but of the specific and terrible possibility that what he heard might require him to make a choice he was not yet ready to make. He stepped into the guest room. He crossed to the armoire against the far wall. He opened it and stepped inside, and left the door fractionally open, and stood in the dark among hanging garments that smelled of cedar and old authority. Below him, he heard Jade enter the room. And then he heard his mother speak. The voice of Pak Sunja did not rise. It never did. That was the thing about her that most people misunderstood when they tried to describe her afterward. They would say she was cold. They would say she was hard. They would reach for words that implied a kind of aggressive force. But the truth was more precise and more unsettling than that. Sunja did not need volume. She had spent 40 years in a world where the loudest person in the room was almost never the most dangerous one, and she had absorbed that lesson so completely that it had become structural, woven into the way she breathed, the way she held a teacup, the way she said a name. She said Jade's name now the way you place an object on a table that you intend to examine. Upstairs, in the dark of the armoire, Jin-hyuk pressed his back against the cedar-scented wood and did not move. He heard Jade respond. The tone was measured, polite, careful, carrying that particular restraint of someone who has decided in advance to be generous with people who may not deserve it. He recognized it. It was the same register he used in business meetings with men he did not trust. It was the voice of someone who had assessed the room correctly and chosen strategy over reaction. She was smarter than he had sometimes allowed himself to fully acknowledge. His mother began to speak in the slow, unhurried cadence she reserved for things she considered already settled. He knew this cadence. It was the one she used when she explained to someone why a decision had been made that they would not like, framing the inevitable as though it were a kindness, as though the cruelty of the conclusion was softened by the reasonableness of its delivery. She spoke about the family name. She spoke about position. She spoke about what a marriage represented in their world. Not sentiment, not companionship, but architecture, load-bearing structure, something that had to be chosen with the same discipline applied to every other decision that affected the organization's stability. She did not raise her voice once. Upstairs, Jin-hyuk felt something shift behind his sternum. Not surprise. He had known, in the abstract, that this conversation would happen in some form. What he had not calculated was the specific texture of hearing it. There is a considerable distance between knowing that something will be said and standing in the dark while it is said to the person you love, unable to see her face, only able to hear the silence she held between her responses. And she was holding it. That was what reached him. Jade was not fracturing. She was not shrinking. He could hear it in the quality of the pauses. They were not the pauses of someone searching for composure. They were the pauses of someone choosing words with intention. Jisu's voice entered then, sharper than the mother's, with the particular edge of someone who has rehearsed their argument and is now delivering it in the tone of improvisation to make it seem more devastating. She spoke about perception, about the partners who would see Jin-hyuk differently, about the kind of woman this world required beside a man in his position. Meaning, though she never said it in precisely these words, a woman who looked a specific way, came from a specific place, carried a specific set of inherited associations that would make the men across the table more comfortable. She was using the language of pragmatism to say something that had nothing to do with pragmatism. Jin-hyuk's jaw tightened in the dark. He had ordered men out of rooms for less. He had ended conversations, ended contracts, ended certain kinds of relationships with a single sentence, and the sentence had always been obeyed. Because in his world, the architecture of consequence was clear, and everyone understood where they stood within it. But he had hidden in a closet. He sat with that fact in the darkness, and did not look away from it. Below, he heard Jade's voice shift, still controlled, still deliberate, but now carrying something additional beneath the surface. Not anger, something older and more dignified than anger. The voice of someone who has been told, in various ways and by various people over the course of their entire life, that they are adjacent to belonging, but never quite within it, and who has decided, at some point that required enormous private courage, that they will not perform smallness to make other people comfortable. She said she understood that this was difficult for them. She said his son had chosen her with all the facts present. She said she had come anyway. And then, and this was the moment that made Jin-hyuk close his eyes in the dark, she called his mother Amani, the word she had practiced, the word she had learned because she had wanted, genuinely and without calculation, to meet this family on their own terms. She used it once more. And then she said, in the clearest voice she had used since entering that room, that she had not come to ask permission. The silence that followed was the longest one of the evening. Jin-hyuk stood in the cedar dark and understood, with the specific and irreversible clarity of a man who has just witnessed something that rearranges his internal landscape, that he had married someone he had underestimated in the most important direction. Not her weakness, but her magnitude. And then his mother said something to his sister, low and in Korean, and his sister responded, and what passed between them in that moment was something he had never heard from his mother in 36 years of living inside her silences. It was not contempt. It was fear. Fear in the Park family had never been permitted a name. It existed, of course. It existed in every room of that white stone house, in the careful way the staff moved through corridors, in the precise angle at which associates lowered their eyes when Sunja entered a space. But it had always been other people's fear, directed inward, contained and managed like every other variable in the organization's ecosystem. The idea that Sunja herself might be afraid of something, that beneath the gray-tailored suit and the pearl necklace and the unreadable stillness, there was a woman who woke in the night and pressed her hand flat against the mattress to feel something solid. This was not a possibility that Jin-hyuk had ever seriously entertained. He entertained it now, in the cedar dark, with his back against the armoire wall and his heart doing something irregular. His mother had said, in the low Korean of private confession, that she was afraid of losing him. Not losing him to an enemy, not losing him to a rival organization or a federal investigation, or any of the forces that genuinely and regularly threatened the structure they had built together over decades. Losing him to love. Losing him to a woman who made him want something different from what he had been given. Losing him the way you lose someone, not to death, but to a life you cannot follow them into. Jisoo had said it was dangerous. Sunja had corrected her. She had said it was frightening. And there was, in that correction, a precision that only a woman of Sunja's particular discipline would have bothered to make. Dangerous implied something that could be neutralized. Frightening implied something that could not. Jin Hyuk stood in the dark and breathed. Below him, the room had gone quiet, in the way rooms go quiet after something has been said that everyone present knows cannot be taken back. Jade had delivered her final words. Clean, unhurried, absolute. And the air in that salon had rearranged itself around them. He could feel it even from the floor above, even through cedar and wood and the muffled acoustics of a house built for privacy. She had not moved. He knew this without seeing it, the way you know certain things about a person after you have spent enough time in their presence. She was still standing where she had been standing when she said it, chin level, shoulders back, the gold clutch held at her side like a prop she had forgotten she was carrying. Not because she was performing courage, because this was simply what she looked like when she had decided something. And Jin Hyuk, who had spent his entire adult life making decisions in rooms full of men who understood the vocabulary of consequence, understood now with sudden and almost painful clarity that the most consequential decision in this house tonight had been made not by him, not by his mother, not by his sister, but by a woman from Manhattan who had learned the word for mother in Korean because she had wanted to try. He opened the armoire door. He moved through the guest room without hurrying, down the corridor, to the top of the staircase, where the marble steps descended into the light below, and he could see, at the bottom, the entrance to the salon where 3 women stood in a configuration that looked, from above, like a negotiation that had reached its final stage. He descended slowly, each step deliberate. Not for effect, he was past performance now, but because he was thinking, organizing, deciding not what to say but what to be from this moment forward. There is a difference, and it mattered. He appeared in the doorway. Jade was turning to leave. She had done what she came to do. She had stood. She had spoken. She had not reduced herself by a single degree. And now she was done. She was not storming out. She was not trembling. She was simply finished, in the way that people with genuine self-possession are finished with things, completely and without residue. She saw him. Something crossed her face that was not quite relief, and not quite accusation. Something more complex than either. The expression of a woman who is doing rapid internal arithmetic about what his presence here means, and what it does not. Sunja and Jisoo saw him too. No one spoke for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do. He looked at Jade first. Only at Jade. The way he always did in rooms full of other people. She was always the fixed point, the place his eyes returned to before he did anything else. He registered the slight brightness along her lower lash line that she was refusing, through sheer force of character, to let become anything more than brightness. He registered the way she was holding herself. The architecture of someone who has taken a blow and redistributed its weight so efficiently that no one watching would know it landed. He crossed the room to her. He did not stop at a polite distance. He stopped where he always stopped with her, close enough that the conversation became private regardless of who else was present. And he raised both hands and placed them along her face the way you hold something you have realized, perhaps slightly later than you should have, is irreplaceable. She did not pull back, but her eyes asked him something. He answered it before she could put it into words. He told her he had heard everything. He told her where he had been. He said it plainly, without softening it into something easier, because she deserved the plain version, and he was finished. As of this moment, offering anything less than that. He felt her breath change against his palms. He felt the precise micro-tension of someone deciding whether to let something arrive or hold it at the border a little longer. She held it a little longer. "You hid," she said. 2 words. Quiet. Not a question. "I did," he said. Also quiet. Also not an apology yet. Not because he didn't mean to make one, but because an apology offered too quickly is sometimes just another form of self-protection. And he was trying, consciously and with effort, to stop protecting himself at her expense. Then he turned. Still holding her hand now, her fingers laced through his tattooed ones, the diamond of her ring pressing lightly against his knuckle. He turned to face his mother and his sister with his wife beside him, and his face arranged into something that the men in his organization would have recognized immediately. Not anger, not threat, something quieter and more final than either. He told his mother he had heard her. All of it. He told her what he knew she had said, in the low Korean she had not expected him to hear. About losing him, about fear, about the thing underneath the performance of disapproval that had been driving this entire evening. Sunja did not move, did not confirm, did not deny. But her hands, folded in her lap with their habitual stillness, shifted almost imperceptibly. One finger moved against the other. A small thing, almost nothing. Jin-hyuk saw it. He had been reading his mother's small things his entire life. He told her she would not lose him. He told her that the thing she was afraid of was not Jade. The thing she was afraid of was a world in which her son was fully his own, no longer tethered to the structure she had built around him, like scaffolding around a building that had long since learned to stand. He told her this not with cruelty, but with the specific gentleness reserved for truths that have been avoided so long they have grown tender at the edges. Chisu opened her mouth. He looked at her, just looked at her, and she closed it. The room held everything it had accumulated over the course of that evening. The tea gone cold on the table, the pearl necklace catching the low light, the red blazer, the gold clutch, the diamond, the tattoos on the neck of a man who ran an empire and had just, for the first time, run it in the direction of something worth protecting. The night settled over the white stone house the way nights settle over places where something irrevocable has just occurred. Not dramatically, not with any external signal, but with a quality of stillness that is different from the stillness that came before. The air in the salon had changed its character. What had been a room organized around confrontation was now a room in the aftermath of one. And the aftermath of confrontation, when it does not end in destruction, has its own particular texture. Heavier than before, but breathable in a way it was not an hour ago. Jin-hyuk and Jade left the room together. He did not look back at his mother. Not because he was finished with her. He was not finished with her. Would never be finished with her, in the way that children are never entirely finished with the people who built the first version of the world they learned to navigate. But because the looking back could wait, and Jade could not. Some things you attend to in order of what cannot be postponed. And she was at the top of that list now, and he intended her to remain there. They walked up the staircase together, his hand at the small of her back, her heels quiet on the marble. Neither of them speaking yet, because there are conversations that need a room with a closed door before they can begin properly. And they both understood this without discussing it. Behind them, in the salon, Pak Sunja sat with her cold tea and did not move for a long time. Jisoo eventually said her name, quietly, with something in it that was almost, though not entirely, uncertainty. Sunja did not respond immediately. She was looking at the doorway through which her son had walked with his wife, and she was thinking about a thing she had not permitted herself to think about directly in many years. The specific evening, 31 years ago, when her own husband had stood in a room not unlike this one and told his family, in the same quiet and final register that Jin Hyuk had used tonight, that he had made his decision, and it was not available for revision. She had been on the receiving end of that clarity once. She had been the one standing beside him when he said it, the one whose presence was the subject of the family's displeasure. She had forgotten that. Or she had not forgotten it exactly. The mind does not truly forget the formative experiences that shape its defensive architecture. But she had allowed it to become theoretical, to recede behind the decades of accumulated authority until it felt like something that had happened to a different person in a different century. Jade had stood in this room tonight the same way Sunja had stood in a different room 31 years ago. Chin level, voice controlled, refusing to perform smallness. Sunja had been 29 years old. She picked up the cold teacup, set it down again without drinking from it. 그녀는 강하다. She said it to no one in particular, or perhaps to the room, or perhaps to the version of herself that still existed somewhere beneath 30 years of accumulated hardness. She is strong. Jisoo said nothing. She had the intelligence to recognize when a moment did not belong to her. Sunja stood, smoothed the front of her charcoal jacket with both hands, moved toward the doorway with the unhurried precision that was her permanent characteristic, and paused there for a moment with her back to her daughter, looking into the corridor beyond. 내일 아침 식사 준비해, she said. Prepare breakfast for tomorrow morning. A pause. For everyone. Jisoo looked up. Sunja did not explain. She walked into the corridor and the sound of her footsteps diminished toward her own wing of the house, leaving her daughter alone in the salon with the cold tea and the low light, and the particular silence of a situation that had just quietly, without announcement, changed its shape. Upstairs, in the suite at the end of the east corridor, Jade sat at the edge of the bed with her gold clutch set beside her and her heels still on, which meant she had not yet decided whether to stay, or whether the decision to stay required more from her than she had left to give tonight. Jin Hyuk sat beside her. Not close enough to crowd, close enough to be present. The room was quiet. Outside, the New Jersey night was doing nothing remarkable. Traffic on a distant road, the ambient sound of money and distance from anything uncontrolled. Jade looked at her hands. The diamond. The ring that was 6 weeks old. How long were you in there? She asked. Long enough, he said. She nodded slowly. Processing. You heard everything they said to me? Yes. And you stayed in the closet? He did not qualify it, or contextualize it, or wrap it in explanation. He said yes again, simply, and let it sit between them at its actual weight. She turned to look at him. Really look at him. The angular face, the dark eyes, the dragon climbing his neck. The hands that ran an organization of several hundred people and were now resting on his knees with something close to stillness. Why? Not accusatory, genuinely asking. He thought about giving her the strategic answer, the one about intelligence and information and needing to understand the full landscape before acting. It was true. It was also insufficient, and she would know it was insufficient, and he was finished offering her insufficient things. Because I was afraid of what I would have to do when I heard it, he said, and I needed to hear it first before I could do it. Jade was quiet for a moment. What did you think you would have to do? Choose. He said it without hesitation. I knew I would have to choose. I needed to hear exactly what I was choosing against before I could make it mean what it needed to mean. She looked at him for a long time after that, long enough that the ambient sounds of the house settled into something almost ordinary around them. The distant hum of the building systems, the cooling of the night air against the windows. That is the most honest thing you have ever said to me, she said finally. I'm aware. It's also a terrible reason to hide in a closet. Also aware. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile. Too soon for a smile, and she was not the kind of woman who smiled things away before she had finished looking at them directly. But something. The specific softening that occurs when a person decides to stay in a hard conversation rather than exit it, which is its own kind of declaration. Jin, she said, using the name she only used in private, the shortened version that belonged to no one else in his life. If I find out you are hiding in any more closets, you won't, he said. I'm serious. So am I. He turned toward her fully now and took her hand and held it the way he had held it downstairs, her fingers between his, the diamond pressing its small pressure against his knuckle. I spent 36 years learning to read silence. I should have spent some of that time learning to speak before silence became necessary. She looked at their joined hands. Your mother, she said carefully. What she said to your sister. At the end. A pause. What was it? He translated it for her. All of it. The fear, the loss, the thing beneath the cruelty that was not cruelty at its root, but grief dressed in the language of control. He told her about the way Sunja's hands had moved, the single finger against the other, the tell that he had spent a lifetime learning to read. Jade listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment that stretched in a way that was not uncomfortable. She's going to be difficult, Jade said. Yes. For a long time. Probably. And your sister. Jisoo will follow wherever the power settles. He said it without bitterness. When she understands that you are not going anywhere, she will adjust. Jade nodded slowly, turning this over. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Not to him specifically. To the room. To the house. To whatever was listening. I know, he said. That's what changed everything. Outside, the night continued its unremarkable passage. Inside the white stone house in Alpine, New Jersey, the architecture of a family was in the process of renegotiating itself around a new and unignorable reality. That a woman had stood in a room designed to diminish her and had not been diminished. And that the man who loved her had hidden long enough to understand what he was willing to lose and what he was not. And that the matriarch who had built everything had, in a private moment in a salon with cold tea, remembered who she had been before she became what she was. The next morning, breakfast would be prepared for everyone. It would not be easy. It would not be warm in the way warmth comes naturally. It would be the beginning of something long and imperfect, and built from scratch in the way that all genuine things must eventually be built. Without the guarantee of outcome, without the comfort of certainty, with only the daily decision to continue as its foundation. But it would be said. The table would be set for everyone, and Jade Elaine Carter would sit at it. Not because she had been invited graciously, not because she had been accepted fully or understood completely or welcomed in the way she deserved to be welcomed, but because she had decided to stay. And in that house, in that family, in that world built on the currency of who flinches first, staying was the most powerful thing anyone had ever done.
Jordan didn't need a title to be taken seriously. He just needed attention, and the courage to use it. But let me ask you something before you go. What if the person who needs this story the most is you? Not Jordan, you. The woman who learned to carry weight with elegance, while inside her voice told her something was wrong. The woman who confused attention with respect, intensity with sincerity, control with care. The woman who spent too long trying to be understood by someone who benefited from the confusion. If this came too close to something you've already experienced, this product was made for you. The Woman He Can't Manipulate, 30-Day Reset. It's a guided 30-day challenge created specifically for Black women over 45 who are ready to stop accepting less than they deserve. It's not about toughening up. It's about becoming harder to confuse. Scan the QR code on the screen now, or access the link in the video description, or see the pinned comment below. You've paid enough attention. Now it's time to use it.
If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room that was designed to make you feel like you did not belong, and had to decide, in that moment, whether to shrink or to stand? Have you ever loved someone who stayed silent when you needed their voice most, and had to choose whether that silence was the end of something or the beginning of honesty? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, courage, and love that refuses to be diminished, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.